Well, hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's great to be with you on this Monday, April 25th. And tonight we're talking about what the world is tweeting about, namely Twitter itself. Elon Musk's take it or leave it offer to buy Twitter was taken, $44 billion. How will making it a private company change the app and change social media? President Biden nominates a new ambassador to Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia bombs a number of train stations just hours after two cabinet members visit Kyiv. We're live with the latest. Also, a New York judge holds former President Donald Trump in contempt of court. We'll tell you why. And by one account, 90% of space travelers have been white men. Lester Holt meets a woman who could help change that in our special series, Inspiring America. So we've been talking about Russia entering a new phase of its war in Ukraine. But that comes with some very familiar tactics, like destroying infrastructure. Today, Russian missiles hit at least 5 train stations in western and central Ukraine. Officials on both sides of the war confirmed the attack. Now, this happened just hours after 2 U.S. cabinet members were in Kyiv, and they were pretty high up the chain, too. Last night, in secret, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, on the right, and on the left, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. They made it out to Poland before the Russian missile strikes. One attack was in Lviv, near the Polish border. Now, after the trip, both secretaries talked about the aid that is coming and about what they want to see happen next.
Literally every day as we speak, aid is going in. This is aid. If you're here in a few hours, this won't be here. It's going to be on a plane, on its way, or some other means, on its way to Ukraine.
We're going to push as hard as we can, as quickly as we can, to get them what they need. We want to see Russia weakened to the degree that it can't do the kinds of things that it has done in invading Ukraine.
Secretary Blinken told President Zelensky to expect more than $700 million of military aid. That should include more modern weapon systems like the kinds that NATO uses. Meanwhile, today, President Biden nominated a new U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink. The U.S. has not had a permanent ambassador to Ukraine for more than a year. Let's begin tonight with NBC's Cal Perry, who joins us from Kyiv. And Cal, what was President Zelensky's response like to the meeting from Secretaries Blinken and Austin?
It was the first official thank you that we've had from President Zelensky, seeming to be satisfied with the weapons and with the aid and with the meeting that he had. He's always been calling for more, but in his reaction to the meeting, he said, we can feel the difference that this is making. We can see it and we can feel it. It was an extraordinary meeting, partly because on Saturday night, President Zelensky announced that this trip was going to happen. It was something the White House nor the Pentagon wanted to announce for security reasons. And these two gentlemen made their way via train 12 hours from Poland here. They met in the presidential palace, just sort of steps from where I am. So many people, I think, probably surprised that that palace is still standing 60 days into the war. The other interesting thing about it was it fell here on Orthodox Easter. So you had this city sort of swelling with troops from the front who had come to visit family, who had come to go to church. And so it was, I think, a very significant day in this war, Joshua.
Cal, what does that tell us about the security situation on the ground in Ukraine, that you were able to get two, not to rank the cabinet members, but some of them are higher up in terms of the presidential line of succession than others, and the Secretary of State is very high up the chain in terms of the presidential line of succession. What does that tell us about the security situation around Kyiv?
And it was interesting that the lid was blown off the visit, at least on the Ukrainian side, and the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State still carried on with that visit. Look, Kyiv feels like a fortress. This city feels like a city that is at war, but it feels well defended. On the outskirts of the city, you have the remnants of a failed Russian invasion. You have tanks that have been blown in place that are still burned out. Some have spray painting on them. You have, entire neighborhoods destroyed, mass graves, the scenes of incredible, courageous fighting by the Ukrainians, as well as massive death on both sides. But here in the center of the city, you have a city that has largely been unscathed by the war. There have been airstrikes, of course, in and around Kyiv. We still go through air raid sirens here pretty frequently. But the Battle of Kyiv, as General Austin put it, was no question a success on the Ukrainian side. And so what you have remaining here are beautiful pictures like the ones you're seeing here of an Orthodox Easter Sunday that I think many people in this city needed. And I think many of this people in the city obviously very clearly enjoyed, Joshua.
And just to close the loop for some of you who are looking around the world, with regard to presidential line of succession, just to close that loop, if anything happens to the president, then it's the vice president, Speaker of the House, President pro tem, and then the Secretary of State. So he is very close to the top of the line of succession. Secretary of Defense is two behind him. What about Russia's assaults on Ukraine? We had mentioned the missile strikes in western Ukraine near Lviv, out near the Polish border, and also the attacks in eastern Ukraine. You can see on the map some of the areas where we've got reports of attacks. What do we know about what's happening there?
And in eastern Ukraine, you can see it on that map, eastern Ukraine is being slowly picked apart. The attacks in eastern Ukraine seem to be on infrastructure targets, largely electricity substations and some electricity power plants. They're trying to cut the power off in that part of the country and carry out what seems to be a larger scale incursion than we've seen in the past. One thing that we are hearing from Ukrainian officials is they believe that the onslaught in the east is being slowed down by the Russian fighting in Mariupol, that the Ukrainian soldiers, as they would put it, the Ukrainian government would put it, are heroically defending that city, that is preventing Russian forces from redeploying in the east. It was interesting. We saw that here in the capital city. There were so many Ukrainian forces here defending the capital that were able to repel Russian forces, that Russian forces then made gains elsewhere. And we're now sort of seeing a reverse of that. When it comes to those railway attacks, those railway airstrikes, you know, a lot of people here are viewing that as a response to the visit from Secretaries Blinken and Secretary Austin, but also just as a matter of trying to stop the weapons that are coming into this country. So many of those weapons that are coming in from Poland, for example, are coming in via the railway because it's more reliable. So many of the roads here in the in the eastern part and central part of the country where I am have been badly damaged. So we drove from Lviv last week. It was a drive that would normally take 5 hours. It took more like 8 or 9 hours because the roads are out in some places. The traffic is hard to judge. You have refugees that are trying to come back home. And that's why you have these weapons coming in on the train. It seems pretty apparent that the Russians are now targeting those lifelines where weapons are coming from the west into the east, Joshua.
Thank you, Cal. Do stay safe. That's NBC's Cal Perry starting us off tonight from Kyiv. Now, we mentioned that the U.S. has not had an ambassador in Ukraine for more than a year. Let's continue now with a man who used to hold that position. John Herbst served as ambassador there from 2003 to 2006. Today, he is the senior director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Ambassador, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Could we start with that announcement about Bridget Brink being nominated to be the new U.S. ambassador to Ukraine? I'm not sure how familiar you are with her, but could I just get your perspective on the need there in terms of the value of having a permanent diplomatic presence in Ukraine, and also any perspective you might have on Ms. Brink?
Okay. This is something that's been long in the making. And in fact, I don't understand why this didn't happen, say, 6 months ago. But it's finally happening now, and that's very good news. Bridget Brink is a superb Foreign Service officer, currently ambassador in Slovakia, has extensive experience in the post-Soviet space and in Eastern Europe. She's both very, very smart and very tough. And we need both of those characteristics in Kyiv. So she's a terrific choice.
What did you make of the visits by Secretaries Austin and Blinken to Ukraine? I have to admit that when I heard the news that they were there, I got a little chill that went up my spine because I was like, really? Really? Is it safe for the two of you to be there? These two very high-ranking U.S. cabinet members. What's the significance of them going in person to meet with President Zelensky?
Look, it's not completely safe. And in fact, that's part of the reason why they needed to go, to demonstrate strong American support for Ukraine as it fights Kremlin aggression. And in fact, as you know, they're a little bit late in getting there. We've had literally over a dozen European leaders, heads of government, heads of state visit. So them going was a very good thing. But the most important thing is the message they brought to Kyiv and the message they took back away from Kyiv of growing American support for Ukraine as it deals with a Russian invasion, which is in fact designed to kill Ukrainian civilians as well as Ukrainian soldiers.
Is this part, and also Secretary Blinken announced that the U.S. would be returning a diplomatic presence to Ukraine. What is the net effect of these announcements? Do we draw any connections between the announcement of the new nominee for the ambassador to Ukraine, the reestablishment of an ambassadorial presence, a diplomatic presence there, and these two in-person visits? What does all of that signal?
It's all part of a growing, strengthening American policy in support of Ukraine, again, in this war. A recognition that the United States has vital interests in making sure that Ukraine defeats Putin's aggression in Ukraine so we don't have to deal with Putin elsewhere. The return of our diplomats is something that's also a little bit late. We're again following other countries, but it's a good thing. Those diplomats will face some risk because Russian bombs do land in Lviv in the west, Kyiv in the capital. But we need to be there to make sure that our support is as strong as possible. They are doing America's interests, the work of America's interests.
With regard to that support, there was a piece in Time that raised a worthwhile point, which is embassies are often guarded by United States Marines. And the Biden administration, the president himself, he spoke last week at a Democratic Party event in Portland, if memory serves, where he was very categorical that the U.S. would not put boots on the ground in Ukraine out of concerns for what people have said would be the beginning of World War III, basically. How does that work? If you have a diplomatic presence in Ukraine, but not Marines guarding the compound, I understand the rationale, but that also feels like it could raise other problems.
Okay. I think Americans are famous for many things, one of which is common sense. Having Marines protecting an embassy, protecting the classified information, the secret information in an embassy, and also our diplomats is a very different thing than having boots on the ground in a war zone. So I think we can easily explain that we always have Marines at almost all of our missions around the world in all sorts of circumstances. So it makes sense to have them there, and that in no way violates President Biden's pledge to not have boots on the ground fighting a war against Russia and Ukraine. Again, Americans have common sense.
I also kind of feel like the fact that you sent these two, or that the president sent these two secretaries to see President Zelensky is significant. Like the relationship between the military and the diplomatic corps in some ways is very much hand in glove, right? You try to work things out diplomatically so you don't have to deal with them militarily. And we heard Secretary Austin, the Secretary of Defense, say that the U.S. wants to see Russia weakened so they cannot do this again. Talk about that interplay between the diplomatic and the military.
You are absolutely right. When our national security policy works for American interest, our diplomats and our soldiers work very closely together. And you're absolutely right that diplomacy and military activity are closely related. Blinken was there as the senior member of the candidate and as the guy who overall speaks for American policy in that part of the world. Austin is there because Ukraine is fighting a war, and the military support we're sending, by which I mean weapons, is critical for American interests and for Ukraine to defeat Russia. Austin is saying the obvious, that it is in America's interest that Russia's military be weakened is a good thing. If Putin were to win his war on Ukraine, it's not going to stop there. In fact, just this past week, a senior Russian general said that Russia wants to extend its control all the way to the border with Moldova, Transnistria, because there are ethnic Russians there who are, quote unquote, also feeling the effects of repressive policies. That statement is false, but Moscow uses that to justify aggression. And so Moscow's ambitions go beyond Ukraine. They also go to our NATO allies in the Baltic states. So let's defeat Russia in Ukraine. Let's weaken the Russian military in Ukraine so they don't take their aggression into our NATO neighbors, their NATO allies, the Baltic states.
And if we could just bring up that map for one more second, I just want to point out what the ambassador was referring to in terms of Moldova. There was some reports. If you look on the map, you see where Odessa is? the country in green just kind of to the left of where Odessa is, that's Moldova. There's a region called Transnistria, which is where there is this kind of, there was some separatist sort of breakaway activity over the last few days that Vladimir Putin is trying to amp up and to kind of intensify. So, yeah, there you go. You can see it on the map there, Transnistria. That's the area that the ambassador is talking about. So we already know that there is activity in other peripheral areas around Ukraine that Vladimir Putin would like to capitalize on. Remains to be seen whether or not that will happen in the weeks to come. Ambassador John Herbst, it's always good talking to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Still to come, what's trending on Twitter? Twitter is, and so is its future owner. It looks like Elon Musk will buy that social network after all. We'll consider what's in store and share some of your questions about the deal. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Twitter is full of strong opinions. Today, many of the strongest opinions there were about the man who could soon be its owner. This afternoon, Twitter announced that it had accepted a buyout offer from Elon Musk. His deal was worth $44 billion with the intent to make the company private. The deal's value is pegged to the day that Mr. Musk disclosed his stock ownership of Twitter. At the time, he had purchased 9% of its outstanding stock for $39.31 per share. Shareholders will get $54.20 per share of stock. That's a 38% premium from the date of his disclosure. But the deal's not done yet. It still needs approval from shareholders and regulators. In a statement, Elon Musk once again framed this buyout as a matter of preserving free speech. He also elaborated on other changes he might make. Quote, "I also want to make Twitter better than ever by enhancing the product with new features, making the algorithms open source to increase trust," we'll explain that in a second, "defeating the spam bots and authenticating all humans," unquote. A lot of you shared your thoughts with us on Twitter, as you are wont to do. Dante tweeted, "Musk isn't spending $44 billion to make Twitter less valuable. PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX have all changed the worlds they occupy. The odds that Musk makes Twitter better are pretty good." Dr. Granny tweeted, "One person should not have this much power. I think we need more moderation, not less." Joining us now is Fez Siddiqui, a technology reporter for The Washington Post. Mr. Siddiqui, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I would like to start with perhaps my favorite tweet that Rob wrote that I think a lot of people are asking, and I wish more people on Twitter had the guts to say this. We asked, what do people think? And Rob wrote, "IDK enough ATM. I don't know enough at the moment." Thank you, Rob. You are my new favorite person for admitting what you don't know. Can we start with what we actually do know for sure about this deal? A lot of speculation about what it means, but what do we know for sure that this will mean for the future of Twitter?
We know that Elon Musk is coming in as an owner with a focus on his view of what constitutes free speech. We know that he has declared his intention to open up the Twitter algorithm, although that's more complicated than it sounds, to make sort of content moderation decisions more transparent. We know that he is paying $44 billion for this platform that before April 4th, it was not really clear he had any interest in owning. And we know that he's going to have a lot of power at his fingertips, both now sort of the bully pulpit that he has over Twitter, but now as the owner of that same website.
Let's dig deeper into the algorithm. He mentioned that during a TED Talk 2 weeks ago. Here's part of what he said.
In my view, Twitter should match the laws of the country, and really, that there's an obligation to do that. But going beyond that, and having it be unclear who's making what changes to where, having tweets sort of mysteriously be promoted and demoted, with no insight into what's going on. Having a black box algorithm promote some things and not other things, I think this can be quite dangerous.
So let's dig into that last part. A black box algorithm, as he described it, promotes some things and not other things. Let's get real simple. For people who don't understand the back end of social media, what is the algorithm, and why does Mr. Musk say he wants to make it open source, make it publicly viewable?
Yeah, so with Twitter, I mean, the so-called algorithm, the intention of the website was to start showing you tweets in the order in which they are posted. Twitter, through content moderation and maybe the pressures of the modern internet, has tweaked that to some effect. They've started affixing labels to tweets they see as misleading. The timeline is not always chronological, though users can certainly select a chronological timeline. And so the algorithm is basically the series of decisions that determine which tweets you will see in what order.
And let's go back to the other part of what he said. He said that Twitter should match the laws of the country. That feels like one of the thornier pieces of this. I mean, what country is he referring to? I mean, just today, or just over the weekend, the European Union reached a deal on legislation called the Digital Services Act that will require social networks to take a much more active role in terms of policing misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech. We got a statement from the president of the NAACP today that expressed their concerns about the future of dealing with hate speech. Says in part, Mr. Musk, free speech is wonderful, hate speech is unacceptable. Disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech have no place on Twitter. Do not allow 45, referring to the 45th president, Donald Trump, to return to the platform. Do not allow Twitter to become a petri dish for hate speech or falsehoods that subvert our democracy. I'm not sure what to think in terms of the future of how Twitter will deal with misinformation, disinformation, or hate speech.
So Musk, in that clip that you showed, we've sort of been reviewing his comments. And one of the things that he alluded to is this idea that Twitter is promoting or suppressing tweets based on the views potentially expressed within them. And Twitter has said it does not do this. And so Musk is already coming in with a view that doesn't match the facts that Twitter has stated at least apply to the platform. Beyond that, I mean, it really does remain to be seen what will happen in the case of former President Trump, who has been banned from Twitter after the January 6th riots. And, you know, Musk has indicated at least that he is not a fan of the bans, so that's a clue. Bans in general. But he hasn't weighed in on how he would apply that thinking to the former president.
And I do want to note that the former president did tell Fox News that he would not be returning to Twitter. He'd be focusing on Truth Social, which is the platform that he has been promoting but has only messaged on once. And I also want to be clear for those of you watching around the world and who are not versed in the First Amendment does not apply to social media. It has to do with how governments deal with speech. Private companies can do what they want in terms of what they allow or what they don't allow. So you have freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. Fez Siddiqui from the Washington Post, I appreciate you explaining this to us, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Elon Musk says, as we noted, that Twitter should be a haven of free speech. Today, he described it as a digital town square. We would love to know what life is like for you in that square before someone new buys the town. So tell us, how well has Twitter served you as a venue for free speech? Call us with your story, 888-575-2NBC. That's 888-575-2622. How well has Twitter served you as a venue for free speech? You can also email us now tonight at NBCnews.com, and we're at NBC Now Tonight on Facebook, Instagram, and, of course, Twitter. We will share some of your stories tomorrow night. Up next, we will break down today's legal news, and there was a lot of it, from Johnny Depp to former President Trump to the Supreme Court. Our legal analyst, Danny Savalos, joins us just ahead. Stay close. We are following a lot of legal stories across the United States today, and let's start with one from the U.S. Supreme Court and a case of religious freedom. Justices are considering the case of a high school football coach. Joseph Kennedy lost his job after refusing to stop praying on the field after games. Mr. Kennedy says that the Bremerton School District violated his religious freedom. The school district says it did not want to seem like it was endorsing a single religion. The next case involves former President Donald Trump. Today, a New York State judge held him in contempt of court. He has failed to comply with a subpoena from the State Attorney General Letitia James. President Trump will have to pay $10,000 a day until he satisfies the court's requirements. This is widely considered a big win for Attorney General James's civil investigation. Her office is looking into whether Mr. Trump lied about the value of his assets in annual financial statements. And finally, the defamation trial continues between Johnny Depp and his ex-wife Amber Heard. Mr. Depp's cross-examination is over after 4 days on the stand. Today, Ms. Heard's lawyers played audio recordings of fights that the couple had. Johnny Depp is suing Amber Heard for defamation over an op-ed she wrote for The Washington Post. NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos is here to help us make sense of it all. And Danny, let's start with this case, Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, and this matter of church versus state. Tell us how some of the oral arguments went in terms of the justices' thinking on this.
Well, the arguments really are essentially free speech, First Amendment on both sides. On one side, the school argues that students have a right to be free of religious instruction. And of course, the coach is arguing that he has a right to express his religious beliefs to a degree. Government employees do not shed all their First Amendment rights at the door. Now, if we were not in a Supreme Court that is conservative leaning or conservative majority, I would say this was a layup for the school. But I'm not so sure with this court. And the reason for that is you look at that picture right there, that picture you just showed, very important because the coach's team is framing this as if he was sort of murmuring to himself a prayer, maybe in the locker room quietly. No, he did it at the 50-yard line and people would join in with him. So I could see a court concluding that this was a school endorsement, so to speak, of religion.
How do we parse that, though? I mean, it's one thing, you see NFL players all the time. They make a touchdown, they high-five the crowd, they kneel down in the end zone, they pray, they get up, they wave to mom, and they keep right on playing, right? So I'm wondering how we parse the nature of one's prayer, right? I pray here at this desk all the time. Oh, Jesus, help me get through this hour, right? How you parse the nature of a prayer
right now
in terms of right now, in terms of right now, Jesus, in terms of how it runs afoul of someone else's First Amendment rights. Where do you draw that line?
Well, the NFL example is a pretty easy example because those are private entities. Although there may be an exception with the Green Bay Packers. They are, I believe, community owned. But the point is the NFL is a private business. And so the rules are totally different. The First Amendment doesn't apply at all. When we're in schools, and I was a coach at a school, I mean, that was a really big issue. You really couldn't do prayers at a public school of any kind. And the rules over the years, important interpretations are that really just about anything can be considered a prayer and therefore unconstitutional or violative of the Constitution. So the key is there state action? And in this case, it's a close call because if he's doing it privately in the privacy, say, of his car in the parking lot, much easier case for the coach. He's doing it after the game on the 50-yard line. In that picture you just showed, I believe, is of him praying and the students joining in. By the way, it doesn't matter if students join in. That's not really relevant on the issue of whether or not it's violative of the Constitution, because the key is that there are other students who may feel pressured to join in or that are being forced or indoctrinated in a particular religion.
All right, let's get to these other cases. With regard to the former president being held in contempt of court, $10,000 a day. Bring us up to speed here on what exactly it is that he is accused of having done that is contemptuous to the court and what it would take to remedy that.
I love this, and not because I have any particular bone to pick with Trump himself. I love this because as a litigator, I have had enough of other sides, other parties in discovery during litigation come into court and say, I know we're supposed to produce A, B, and C, but we looked and we don't see it. And the reality is that the other side, the other attorneys, have no way of knowing what the other side has in their pockets and in their files. And so a lot of these parties get away with that. And you know what? President Trump isn't going to get away with it, or former President Trump is not going to get away with just coming to court and saying, I know I have an obligation to turn over documents, but I couldn't find any documents. Hey, that doesn't work. Unfortunately, the reality is, especially in New York litigation, it works far more often than it should. So it's so gratifying to see someone finally being held accountable, whether or not it's the president. And contempt of $10,000 a day, I don't care who you are, Trump or a guy on the street, that's a significant amount of money if you delay much longer.
And we should be clear, Danny, that there are some cases, I think there was a case very recent, I believe it was the case involving Alex Jones with InfoWars, where he had been held in contempt for not showing up, finally showed up, and then the court kind of relieved him of the economic burden of that. So I guess the judge has some discretion in terms of whether or not he would have to pay that money if he does make good on producing these documents, right?
Yes and no. In fact, when it comes to contempt, it's almost entirely a creation of judicial discretion. In fact, contempt exists only so that the court can enforce its own rules. It exists in a kind of netherworld of judicial authority, and the courts have this authority, and it's so broad they can fashion all kinds of remedies, and that can include cutting someone a break if they comply with the order. But contempt runs from the range from criminal to civil contempt. You can go to jail. Folks who don't pay their child support can be imprisoned until they do, until they purge is the term. So yeah, contempt has a wide variety of options for a judge, and it's all designed to keep essentially order in the court.
Before I have to let you go, the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case, today was the final day of Johnny Depp's cross-examination. Where does that leave us in terms of this case? It seems like each side is very much accusing the other of similar things, but these audio tapes and texts have had a lot to do with the cross-examination over the last few days. Where does that leave us?
I feel like I'm the only one who sees this as a train wreck for the plaintiff so far, not because they necessarily have a bad case. This may be the one defamation case in a million that is actually actionable. In other words, that the plaintiff has a case. People often claim defamation. They rarely have a case. But Johnny Depp, I believe, didn't perform that well as a witness. And yet, you know, I've done a deep dive on the social media, and I can find plenty of people that think he just dunked all over Amber Heard's attorney. And I just don't see it that way. And I suspect that maybe jurors in the hushed atmosphere of the courtroom may not have read Johnny Depp as incredibly entertaining. But then again, he's a massively successful entertainer. Maybe if there's one person out there who can spar with an attorney and the rules are slanted against the witness, make no mistake about it, maybe Johnny Depp is that one person that can pull it off. I don't know. But I'm a huge fan of the actor.
Thank you, Danny. Appreciate you explaining this to us. It's NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos with us tonight. We will get to some of today's other top stories in a moment, including wildfires burning in 3 western states, the big takeaways from France's high-stakes presidential election, and another Amazon union vote underway. For the first time in 2 decades, France will have a re-elected president. Emmanuel Macron won a second term this weekend. Monsieur Macron got about 58.5% of the vote. His challenger, Marine Le Pen, took 41.5%. President Joe Biden congratulated President Macron during a call today. Mr. Biden also released a statement referring to France as America's oldest ally and a key partner, dating, of course, all the way back to the American Revolution. Ukrainian President Zelensky also supported Mr. Macron's victory, but it remains to be seen how this will play into Ukraine's war against Russia. Reason being, Emmanuel Macron is one of the few Western leaders who has been in contact with both Mr. Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. Joining us now is Ketevan Gorgestani, a Washington correspondent with France 24, an international news network owned by the French government. Welcome to the program. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
What is the early read in terms of the results of this? Is this being interpreted more as a win for President Macron or a loss for Marine Le Pen?
Well, the first obvious read is, of course, a loss for Marine Le Pen, but at the same time, a victory in the sense that her party is at its strongest it's ever been. It is really a rise for the far right, and so even though she still has missed the final step of being elected, her party is gaining ground in France. So this is something that is being closely looked at, the rise of the far right. At the same time, there was this narrative around Emmanuel Macron as this highly unpopular president, and how this was going to be extremely close. The latest polls right before the vote were very, very close. He ended up winning by a larger margin, even though it was closer than 5 years ago. But there's a tendency to forget a little bit that in the first round, he actually did much better than he did himself 5 years ago. He gained, I think, about 4 points in the first round. So despite a lot of people disliking him and a lot of people voting for him simply to block Marine Le Pen, he himself has also gained ground, has also strengthened a party that he created from scratch right before the elections in 2017. And there is a larger part of the population now that agrees with Macron and that wanted to see him reelected.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think the fact that he created a political party to fill what he saw as this need, this kind of centrist space that he could occupy, and won, said a lot about where French politics were when he was elected. Marine Le Pen's rise and her national party also says a lot about where she is. And then some of the unrest that France, particularly Paris, has seen in the last few years, especially over economic issues. I wonder what this tells us about how the French are doing these days, about the sentiment in terms of ordinary people living their lives, trying to get by, and how they feel about the national government's role in their lot in life. What does that tell us?
Well, I think there is a general sense in France that you're always disappointed with what the government does and not really happy with what the government does, especially not happy with the incumbent president. And you mentioned it in your lead-in. That's why a president hadn't been reelected in 20 years in France. That said, if you look at the numbers, the economy, the French economy rebounded pretty well from the pandemic because of the government's intervention in the economy. So there's a bit of a dichotomy between what a lot of people, a lot of the middle class and a lot of the lower class feel, the struggle they feel with inflation, for example, and the actual reality of the numbers, the sheer numbers of the economy, and something that we see a little bit everywhere else in the world and right here in the United States. So this dissatisfaction with the incumbent president is nothing new. I think things have gotten a little bit more acute because of the pandemic, because of the war in Ukraine and the inflation that it's bringing. But it's not something that is totally new in France.
How much do international issues factor into this election as opposed to internal issues? Marine Le Pen has campaigned very strongly on matters of immigration. She has said that the legislative elections in June will be the great battle, so it could be possible that her party maybe makes a showing there. We'll see what that turns into. Of course, part of our focus on Emmanuel Macron has had to do with the war in Ukraine and his efforts to try to speak to both sides of this. Is that something that mattered heavily to French voters in this election, or is that more kind of the way the outside world is viewing what's happening in France?
I think in this case, usually I would say that foreign policy is not necessarily something that voters care deeply about, except maybe for a small group of people who are very in tune with what is happening in the world. That said, this time around, the two candidates had such an opposed vision of the world, and especially in this time, this context of the war in Ukraine, their vision of the world was so different that you could not pay attention to it, even if foreign policy was not your first priority. You had one candidate who's pro-European, pro-NATO, pro-Western alliance, pro-globalization, really insisting on the role of France within Europe and the strength of Europe. We saw him, President Macron, putting the European flag under the Arc de Triomphe. And on the other hand, you had a candidate who is extremely critical of the European Union, even though she says now that she no longer wants to leave the EU, extremely critical of the NATO alliance, also very close pro-Russian, if you will, and that was something that Macron used against Marine Le Pen, her proximity to Vladimir Putin, her proximity and the comments she's made in the past about Russia. So I think this time, because of the context and because of the type of candidates, it was important.
And you did see a number of EU flags alongside the French flags on the Champ de Mars when President Macron was giving his victory speech on Sunday. Ketivan Gojestani, Washington correspondent with France 24. Thank you very much for making time for us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thousands of people are evacuating wildfires in New Mexico, Arizona, and Nebraska. At least one person has been killed. NBC Steve Patterson has an update.
Yeah, it is an early start to wildfire season, if you're still saying that seasons exist with how much fire we're now seeing year round. But still, fires this early in April, unusual, and they are all over the place. Starting in Nebraska. Nebraska saw 17 fires in 16 of its counties since Friday. Now they're dealing with one major fire, the 702 fire. Turned it deadly, killing a former retired fire captain who was spotting the fire, drove into some of the smoke and got lost in the flames there. Crews have no containment on that fire. Still several fires burning across the state. The winds expected to pick up there later on this week. They're doing as much as they can around the clock to get containment on that fire and others that continue to burn. Meanwhile, New Mexico still facing a series of its fires. Two of the largest actually merged northeast of Santa Fe, now just 12% contained, but still 54,000 acres burning in that area. Hundreds of homes still in the crossfire. Also in Arizona, crews battling the tunnel fire there. Still just a small amount of containment as well. Crews trying to put as much containment on that fire as they possibly can. But these fires burning in the Southwest, it is happening because, well, climate change. We're not afraid to say it anymore. And for the fact that the years-round drought, the years-long drought has been going on for so long now, dry vegetation plus these heavy winds plus the elevated temperatures means fires, yes, now are burning in April, and the forecast is not looking good. We may get some snow, even some rain in New Mexico. Arizona's drying out, though, still, and the winds expected to pick up in all of these states, making this week another elevated fire danger week for the guys on the front lines. Back to you.
Thank you, Steve. That's NBC Steve Patterson with the latest. A unionization vote is underway at a second Amazon warehouse here in New York City. About 1,500 workers are eligible to vote there. This election comes less than a month after a historic victory at another warehouse in Staten Island. That facility, known as JFK 8, became the first Amazon warehouse to unionize in the United States. This week's vote is taking place at a smaller facility known as LDJ 5. The employees there say they have had less time to organize, but despite this, they say they are confident that they will win.
You convince one worker and they convince 3 of their friends, right? So you chip away at it slowly, and suddenly, like, you know, a week later, we've realized that the vibe in the building is a lot different than it was a week ago. And, you know, no one gave up, and we prevailed through all of the stuff that Amazon threw at us. And I think that we're coming into this election victorious.
Voting is taking place in person under a tent outside the warehouse. It will end on Friday night. One NASA astronaut is about to make history in space this week. Lester Holt introduces us to her in our latest installment of Inspiring America. Before we go. Before we go, our special series, Inspiring America. Tonight, we meet a history maker in space. NASA has only sent 4 black women into space as astronauts, 4. Well, this week, Jessica Watkins plans to become the 5th. There she is. And she will become the first black woman to serve an extended stay at the International Space Station. NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt has her story.
I understand you did several internships as a grad student at NASA. Did you ever think you'd be sitting here wearing that uniform with a mission on your schedule?
Oh man, it is a true blessing and an honor to be in this position. I certainly always really enjoyed all of my internships and the exposure that I got with NASA, and dreamed of just being a part of the NASA mission, the NASA team, the NASA family, and to be able to do so in this role in this way is just super exciting.
You're in a business where there's a pretty long wind-up from the time you're selected as a trainee until you actually get to go up. I think you started training or were selected in 2017. What has the anticipation been like to finally get your chance to strap into a rocket and go up?
We spend a lot of time preparing for this moment, and we spend a lot of time doing simulations and, for lack of a better term, kind of pretending to do the real thing. So it's really exciting and really cool for us to be able to actually put all of that work into practice and to go up there and see the real thing.
This mission has gotten a lot of attention because you will be the first African-American woman to serve on the space station. Do you see that as a barrier-breaking moment or just part of a natural progression?
In some ways, I think it's almost both, and I think that is what is exciting about it, is that we have reached this milestone, this point in time, and the reason that we are able to arrive at this time is because of the legacy of those who have come before to allow for this moment. And then also recognizing that this is a step in the direction of a very exciting future. So to be a part of that is certainly an honor, and I think that it is both of those things at once.
Is it also a teachable moment, an opportunity for you to teach to not only people of color but women the importance of STEM and all the things that you had to put in to get where you are today?
Certainly for me, growing up and throughout my career, it's been really important for me to see people who look like me or have my background or similar experiences in the roles that I aspire to and contributing in ways that I aspire to contribute. To the extent that I'm able to do that for others, for other young girls or young people of color, I'm grateful for the opportunity to return the favor.
I understand that you're potentially on the track that would take you onto one of the upcoming moon missions. Is that something you think a lot about, actually walking on the moon and really be able to leverage your expertise as a geologist?
For me, as a geologist, a planetary scientist, the idea of going back to the moon as an agency and as an astronaut corps is super exciting. Certainly for myself as an individual, but also as a team to think about the challenges and come up with the technologies and push the bounds of the science that we can learn on the moon is just super exciting. And I'm just happy to be a part of it and can't wait to be a part of that future.
It feels to me like this is an especially exciting time to be in the space business. We're not only seeing missions like this by NASA, but as you know, these civilian spaceships that have gone up recently. Do you get that sense that this is a really important time when it comes to space?
We are so lucky to be a part of human spaceflight right now in history. We have so many different types of vehicles that we're working on. As you mentioned, we are working with multiple partners, both our commercial partners, SpaceX and Boeing, as well as our international partners that help us participate in the International Space Station. And then in addition, thinking about going to different destinations, thinking about the moon and on to Mars. Mars is particularly close to my heart. My graduate work was on Mars in particular. And so the idea of getting to send people there and get boots on the ground and actually pick up those rocks is super exciting.
That was NBC's Lester Holt reporting, who, by the way, we should note, just received another honor. Congratulations, Lester, because yesterday, the National Association of Broadcasters inducted him into its Hall of Fame. The NAB president credited his integrity, gravitas, and dedication for earning him this distinction. But to hear Lester tell it, his success has more to do with something anyone can do if we choose to.
There's a real value in being nice to people. There's a real value in
try to bring camaraderie to the news organization, and respecting not only those you work with, certainly your audience, but those you cover as well, that you can sit down with someone whose thoughts may be inflammatory or maybe offensive to some people, but give them that moment of respect to hear them out, to challenge them. And I think that's something I've tried to do. Others will judge whether I've done it well or not, but I really think it's important to treat people well and with respect across the board.
Each year, the NAB Hall of Fame inducts one honoree from TV and one from radio. This year's Radio Hall of Famer, all things considered, from NPR News. This is its 50th year on public radio. Hey, remember to send us your stories about Twitter as a venue for free speech. We're at NBC Now Tonight on social media. You can leave us a voicemail or an email. But until we meet again, I am at NBC Joshua. Thanks for making time for us. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.